Welcome to Lesson 2, in which we are going to learn how to explain both the form and the function of participles in context. Our text for this lesson comes out of the book of Matthew. Matthew 4 verse 2 reads, Ke nefstefsas hemeras tes raconta, ke nuktas tes raconta husteron epinasin. Translation: And after he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. Let us now consider the syntactical relationships in this text. We begin with our main clause, which is usteron epinasin, translated as and afterwards he became hungry, or then he became hungry. What we see is that there is an adverb of time, husteron, modifying the main verb epinasin, telling us when the action of the main verb was taking place. The main verb is then developed by an anathrous participle phrase, nestepsas hemeras tes raconta ke nuktas tes raconta. Translation: After he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. What we see here is that the action described by the participle nestepsas is mainly directed towards the verb epinasin, so it's an adverbial participle. Not only that, but that the action described by the participle is antecedent in time to that of the main verb. In translation, we will bring it out with an added after he fasted. For the purpose of learning, I want us to now look at one other exegetically important bit of information that we find in this text, or issue that we are dealt with in this text. So far, you've only learned the most basic functions of the accusative case, but as you will learn here and also in the rest of your Greek journey, the accusative, or the semantic force of the accusative case, let me rather say it like that, is quite broad. So let's look at these two, hemeras and nuktas, the accusative feminine plural nouns. Together with their adjectives, we know that it tells us that Jesus was fasting 40 days and 40 nights. I was fascinated to learn from Dr. Wallace that there is significance in the use of the accusative case to express the extent of Jesus' fasting. More specifically, that should genitives of time have been used, a question would have been raised whether Jesus was fasting during the day, but he was eating at night. You see, according to Dr. Wallace, both hemeras and nuktas are functioning as accusatives of time or accusatives of measure. So that question, whether Jesus was fasting the entirety of the time or whether he was fasting just maybe during the day and eating at night, or vice versa, is answered by the use of the accusative case. I found that fascinating and wanted to share that with you. An important part of exegesis, of course, is to be able to recognize verbal forms. I'm sure you will agree with me that it will be difficult to translate a verb if you don't have any clue what its tense, voice, person, or number is. So to help you, I want us to look at the two verbs in this sentence and then learn how to recognize the key diagnostics that tells us at a glance what type of verb it is. We begin with the indicative epinasin. When we look at this verb, we see two clearly distinguishable diagnostics. That stands out and that tells us what type of verb we are dealing with. The augment, of course, tells us that this must be some form of a past tense verb. And the sigma epsilon tense formative tells us that this must be an aorist, because remember, in the third person singular of aorist active verbs, aorist active indicative verbs, the alpha in the tense formative changes to an epsilon, so this is easily, the two together tells us the whole picture, and that is that this is an aorist active indicative third person singular. If you are asked to explain its morphology, you will begin with the augment. Built on that is the aorist active tense stem, plus then the tense formative, which, as we have noted, the sigma alpha changes to a sigma epsilon, which is a very clear and easily recognizable diagnostic, plus then the secondary active personal ending. The new is in brackets because, as you already know, third person singulars in the aorist active indicative don't have personal endings, so the new is a movable new. So please keep that in mind. If you are asked to pass this verb, you will pass it as an aorist active indicative third person singular from Pinal, meaning he, she, it was hungry. Let us now move on to the participle. Nestefsas. Again, we see very clear and distinguishable diagnostics off the bat. The first one, of course, is the presence of the sigma alpha, which points to an aorist. And then the second one is the fact that there is no augment. So what we are dealing with is an unaugmented tense stem, which we know that because participles don't indicate absolute time, the aorist participle is built from an unaugmented tense stem. So we know that we are dealing with an aorist active participle. The sigma case ending, again, tells us that this must be a nominative, masculine, singular, aorist active participle. If you are asked to explain its morphology, you will again start with the unaugmented aorist active tense stem. Added to that is the tense formative sigma alpha, plus then the active participle morpheme, neutral. I just want to stand still here for a second. This is why it is so important that you know your rules. Because if you see a participle with a sigma case ending, and you don't see the neutral, you know that the rule says that because of the sigma case ending, the neutral drops off. If you don't know your rules, you are going to struggle to recognize what type of participle this is. And then the last building block is a nominative masculine singular case ending sigma, which we have said causes the neutral to drop off. In summary, some of the main points. Firstly, we need to realize that context is absolutely vitally important in determining the force of a Greek participle. Secondly, as we saw in our example, The aorist participle is usually, but not always, antecedent in time to the action of the main verb. Third, the subject of the participle is usually, but not always, the subject of the finite verb. Fourth, the sa tense formative changes to se in the first aorist third person singular verbs. And then lastly, the new tau drops off due to the sigma case ending in nominative masculine singular third declension participles.